I mean, again, the experience is always changing. So we have another panel coming up, and there are 2 stools. We're going to stick to 2 stools. This is going to be an excuse to be out there with you. So next up is a panel with Sue MacDonald, Chief Product and Marketing Officer, People Corporation, Karim Bishara, Director, Customer Success, Ethica. So why don't you join me up on stage, and I'm going to come down a little bit, and I'll ask questions from the audience. I'll do my Geraldo Rivera impersonation. Just don't throw chairs. None of that. So welcome to CXFS. And maybe, Sue, I know you've been here before, but introduce yourself. Tell a little bit about yourself and your history and your organization.
Sure. I think yesterday I was leading a panel, and I kind of said, I feel like I'm one of the OGs, a veteran in the industry, when this industry didn't even exist, right? So if we think back, it was sort of product, marketing, which is my background, and then distribution, and then it all confluences together when we started talking about customer journeys, we started talking about omnichannel. So really my experience has been from one corner of King Bay to another corner of King Bay. So the only thing that ever changes when I change jobs is which Starbucks I go to. So that's kind of it. I've been in B2B, B2C, insurance, retail, wealth, and asset management. So played the full gamut. And so just thrilled to be here today.
Awesome. I'm Karim. I work for a company called Ethica. We were a little Canadian startup in credit card fraud and disputes. They got acquired by MasterCard 5 years ago. I kind of started off my career as a CSR at Ethica and kind of just grew up learning customer experience, different roles throughout the organization, and overseeing customer success teams, account management teams, also done B2C, B2B. I'm super excited to be here and share whatever insights I can with the group.
So B2B, B2C, B2B2C, B2C to B2C to B, all sorts of mixes, right, of different kind of organizational types, and there's a lot to learn from each. But talk a little bit about the similarities and then the differences, specifically B2B, B2C, when you think about customer experience.
You want me to go?
Sure.
Okay. Listen, I think as we've noticed, I think historically, once again, I go back to way back time. And so historically, B2B was all driven by business development, by golf games, who you know and what your Rolodex was, and smiling and dialing, right? Like that's essentially how you were generating leads. The reality is every B2B customer is a B2C customer. So expectations have risen across the board, and you're seeing this confluence on what a B2B customer is looking for and then what a B2C customer is looking for. So there's an expectation of regardless of the service or the product that you're delivering, that we should be able to interact both from an omni-channel standpoint. And that is inclusive, not just on the servicing post-sale, but also upfront when we talk about the shopping journey. Every single B2B customer is the same as a B2C customer. The first place they're going is Mr. Google. And if you're not present in a relevant and slick fashion on Mr. Google, then you're not in the consideration set. And so B2B really, some companies, unless they're SaaS, struggle with that transition to realize that the shopping journey is largely driven. I think there was a McKinsey study that in the B2B space, 20% of purchasing decision in the B2B space is based on brand. If you told somebody in the B2B space that 20 years ago, they would have laughed their head off because they would have said, it's all about me. It's about my personal brand. And that's not the case today.
And I was going to say, like, at the end of the day, like and you kind of alluded to this, you're dealing with a human at the other end of the transaction, right? That's a human that you're trying to market to. It's a human that's buying from you. So whether they're buying in a B2B space or in a B2C space, you need to be able to acknowledge that there's a human interaction that I need to make relevant here. The other thing is, when we're talking about B2B, and you alluded to this a little bit too, is there's this notion of B2B and I need to market to a business, but I need to also understand who the customer that they're servicing is as well, right? Because if I don't understand the C at the end of their line of business, then I won't be able to actually service this business here. So to be able to understand that there's a human at the end of the day, that I need to be able to speak to, that I need to be able to interact with in a way that they want to be engaged with, like you said, like that's going to be that digital experience for a lot of people these days, in addition to understanding who they're trying to service in a SaaS environment is critically important.
Yeah, and I think you brought it up, and I'm going to skip ahead to one of those questions, because what you're talking about is there's still emotion in the business, right? And so understanding that, being functional performance, being engaged, but you're still focusing on tying in that experience to demonstrate and tie into the emotion of the of that business person as well. How does that change though when you're emotionally trying to tap into a B2B person to a B2C, or does it change at all?
I mean, I'd say that ultimately Sue and I were chatting about this before. Whatever you're selling needs to actually make a difference in the customer's, the problem that they're trying to solve. So that cannot change, right? I need to make sure that whether it's a service or the product that I'm going to be selling, it addresses the customer need. But the customer should also want to work with me to a certain extent. Because if I'm creating an experience with friction or even just an unpleasant experience, the customer might work with me, but they're working with me because there isn't a much better alternative. And the moment that a better alternative becomes available, they jump ship. Rather, if I'm able to create an environment where they enjoy working with me and they see that call with me coming up and they're actually excited to be like, we get to catch up with Karim or whomever, or they're looking forward to be able to hear what other updates are coming down the pipeline or whatnot, you create that positive experience where people want to engage with you in addition to using your service or your product that solves their business need. The emotional component of it, again, there's a person at the end of that transaction. And you want to enjoy that experience, and that emotional attachment that you have, or the emotion that you make someone feel, makes a difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, listen, I would simply add that B2B, as I was talking about, the old style of business development, B2B, you still need that high-touch, trusted, consultative interaction. The B2B environment tends to be a bit more complex. So I will still do my shopping, my prospecting, buying journey online. I'm still looking for word of mouth and referrals. So no different than I would say, a high-value client but even, actually, we were talking about this yesterday, even in branch land within financial services, people are opening more branches. And so I'm actually contradicting myself to say, listen, it's becoming, whether it's transactional level or highly complex, every individual wants to speak and look into the whites of somebody's eyes, right? So they still want that advisory, that trusted, consultative component, and it needs to be a fair exchange of value. And so I think how you do that, once again, how you do that by marrying the digital and the phygital space, you marry the digital and the physical space, is making sure that you're actually providing proactively, whether it's the white papers, whether it's the content, helping people solve their problem online or educate them before they actually sit down with you face to face. So you have to earn the right to sell, and you have to earn the right to sell more or retain the business. It needs to be an ongoing interaction. And so my argument has been, once again, I'm doubling down on the statement that there's really, really no difference between the B2B and B2C space.
Well, I think the approach shouldn't be different. Obviously, we just talked about that. But would you agree, though, that sometimes it's easier for a B2B company to fall into more product-centric versus customer-centric? And how do B2Bs kind of overcome that tendency to fall back?
I'm only shaking my head because I'm living and breathing this right now. I think it is really understanding the moments that matter, applying B2C customer journey mapping and applying that in the B2B environment. I think that's when some of the ahas come about, right? I think in the B2B environment, you still do have legacy organizations or organizations that it's always worked that way without actually keeping up with what consumers' preferences are. So once again, if you're the head of HR or you're the person you're the CEO that's making the decision in a B2B environment, that CEO, that CHRO, they also are a B2C consumer. And so they'll sit there and kind of go, well, God, I can just go on Amazon and I can find it. Why can't I do this for my $1 million investment that I'm just using right now? I should be able to be serviced. I'm spending even more money here. I should be serviced in the channel that I want. I should be proactively, consulted to. I should be advised to. And so that's a multi-dimensional or multi-channel approach. And it starts with kind of the journey map. and figuring out the moments that matter and how you can add value in those.
And I think just to add on to what Sue said, like sometimes in the B2B space, we become hyper-focused on like, these are the 2 or 3 products or services that I have in my arsenal that I can kind of offer a customer. And outside of these, I don't really have anything else I can offer a customer and nothing can be further from the truth. And why I share that is, although these are the 2 or 3 things I can sell, and they're the only product offerings or service offerings that my organization has, if I don't understand the customer journey and I don't understand what the customer needs or doesn't need, I won't be able to either give them this or sometimes realize maybe this doesn't actually solve what they want or what they need. Like, this doesn't address their pain. And if I speak to them from a place of, well, maybe have you tried this, haven't tried that, not understanding that it doesn't actually solve their problem, I lose all integrity and I lose all credibility with that customer. Sometimes you actually gain much more credibility to a customer and this right to sell to a customer if you tell them, hey, this stuff right here that I sell, you won't be able to use. This actually doesn't solve your problem. She actually has something that can solve your problem. Maybe give Sue a call. But I actually can't help you, or let me introduce you to someone who might be able to. And although that might not solve the your revenue goals or targets or whatnot, and someone might look at you saying, what are you doing? You're sending someone to a different organization. You're actually building that integrity and that trust with that customer to be able to come back to you to say, hey, you helped me out before. I have this new problem. Can you help me out with this new problem? And I now may be able to give them something here, but I'm building that relationship, that consultative, that advisory partnership with that customer to earn the right to sell and to retain them as a customer in future as well.
Yeah, we talked actually yesterday with Brian, we talked a little bit about that, how you're building the relationship, et cetera. And obviously it's even more important in this industry, financial services, banking, investments, really insurance, whatever that may be. The reality is, you're trying to create a much stronger relationship than just transactional, because that's the key, as you just said. But how do you balance that, though, with the digital side of it? Because,
So let's be really, really clear. In financial services, money is highly, highly emotional. And the less you have of it, generally, and I'm being stereotypes, the less you have of it, the more emotions tied to it, right? So if you bounce that check that's part of my apartment, or I can't make that payment but your system just automatically did it, there's a lot of emotion that I'd like to express towards my bank when that happens. And so I think, when we talk about meeting clients' functional needs from a transactional standpoint, that's one thing. Consumers expect more. They expect you to know them. They expect you to understand them. They expect you to know, please don't bounce that check because I get paid every Friday. I've been paid every Friday for the past 10 years. Can't you just take a look before you actually bounce that damn check? You need to make sure that you are meeting clients' emotional needs, not just their functional needs. So I think how you truly differentiate yourself from a brand, from an advice standpoint, is around the fact that product and making sure that product delivers, that is table stakes. How you actually earn that trust, that integrity, now you're actually going up one level and starting to meet consumers' emotional needs, their emotional attributes. And so the old style NPSs that were floating around that people would say, hey, do they like us? Those are all functional driven attributes. And that's why you see a lot of the banks moving away from traditional NPS, because it's just saying, hey, did you like my checking account? Did you have a good, it's not, did you feel it was a fair, it's transactional in nature, and you need to up the game.
Yeah, just to add to that, also understanding this notion of and Sue made a really good point earlier, engaging with the customer digitally to kind of walk through the door is important, but then understanding what their customer journey is like and the different emotions attached to every step on the customer journey is of critical importance. And I love that you said that people feel emotional about their money. I think that's bang on. And I think that if there's a moment in that customer journey that can impact someone adversely, and I think if you can foresee that coming and kind of protect against it, your customers will remember that in a very, very meaningful way. They'll also remember the opposite, right? People sometimes have a tendency to remember the good, but they have a very big tendency to remember the bad. So if I can foresee the different emotions that can potentially get attributed to a negative step in the customer journey and kind of just play defense, rather than just kind of react, I think makes a very big difference.
I'm just going to add back to your product thing. So the one thing I want to use for an example, we are pushing from a financial services. We are fighting for share of mind and attention from every consumer. And so those that work in financial services, you know that every product is fighting for that one moment of the consumer's time, one marketing dollar, the advisor, pay attention to me. I've got to make my sales targets. But the reality is a consumer cannot be hit with all these messages, right? And so finding the opportune or the moments that matter in the consumer journey, when to tell them, not just to showcase the value, and I'll use an example because it's here in cards. In cards, we actually were mapping out one of the attributes of one of our card offerings was the fact that you had free foreign exchange. Well, when you were purchasing the product, maybe you paid attention to it. And people that play in the cards industry know it's like a shell game. Everybody's changing for new reward systems and moving cards all the time. But what we started to do was actually on your statement, when you had a foreign exchange element, we would reinforce you paid nothing or freebie, because those are the moments that matter, and that's the right time to reinforce the value of that particular offering that you've got. So really, really understanding and demonstrating value throughout the consumer life cycle and interaction model with the product is really important.
And it's organic too, because you're not getting in someone's face to do that. It's just an organic insert of communication just to show value.
That's it.
Yeah.
So obviously, surprising, we don't have very many sessions about generations here, but the younger generations are obviously very different than their parents. I know my kids are very different from me, that's for sure. So as you think about this and you think about this building of relationship and the connection, the digital, physical, and then even from a B2B, B2C, because there's younger folks making decisions now in the B2B space too, right? So how does that influence then this evolving, if you will, environment?
So I think that she kind of addressed it earlier, but this notion of consumers today, whether they're B2C or B2B consumers, their first engagement with my brand is likely to be digital. And I don't think that was necessarily the case before. So I think so long as I understand that I'm marketing to the same generation that is the C in the entire line of the transaction, I think is critical. But then also, people still want to be able to buy from, especially when they're making these big deals, it's not I'm not buying a chocolate bar, I'm buying something that's significantly larger in price and in value. I want to make sure that there's that trust and that advisory and partnership that comes from that kind of organization. So being able to build that relationship is still of critical importance if the consumer wants it, because there could be some B2B companies that may not necessarily care to have that relationship or may not want that high-touch model. I know your product works. I was able to learn everything that there is about your product. I'm serviced when I need to be serviced, but I don't want you in my face. Your product works for me. Your service works for me. Let it run. I don't need you in my face trying to come in with QBRs and we need to have this call to take you golfing. And I frankly don't have time for you, nor am I interested in having a conversation with you. So I think also just not being tone deaf to your customers' needs and their desires, I think is important, because you don't want to be that annoying person that someone looks at their phone saying, why are they calling me again?
Yeah, I think, when you think about the evolution, if somebody kicked off discount brokerage 20 years ago, it was so nascent. Who's ever going to invest their own personal money in a digital space? I need to talk to someone. I just said money's an emotional need. It very much is. But the younger demographics are so much more comfortable with making larger purchasing decisions. And US, Canada, oh, that mortgage looks right, I'm good. Or, I'm absolutely, you've provided me all the information and the tools. I feel pretty confident in actually making that trade. I feel pretty confident in actually making that purchasing decision 100% digital. To your point, I don't want any advice. I might just actually want to call somebody only if something goes wrong. So it's a function of, I would say there is absolutely a shift in demographics and what we would consider, you may never buy digital, right? So Not saying we're aging, just throwing it out. I'm going to put him over there.
Oh, we are.
But you start to actually see the shift. So that bar of what's acceptable to purchase and how to interact online keeps moving with every generation. And you need to be cognizant of that to understand where your opportunities lie.
And sometimes, just to make one final point on this, sometimes insisting on I need to have like a face-to-face, or like we have to have a more engaged conversation before you're able to pull the trigger on a purchase creates unnecessary friction that may then make me pivot to a different vendor, a different provider, because that's just a frictionless experience. I don't have to talk to anyone. I can just get everything, like you said. I have all the information I need to make a decision. I've made my decision. I've purchased. I can move on to the next thing I need to work on. So, like, I think just being aware of adding more friction when it may not necessarily pay dividends.
Yeah, early this summer, I was at a conference, and they actually brought in seniors in high school as a panel. It was a banking conference, and it was amazing to listen to these high school seniors talk about what it is to be a consumer now in their eyes. And they're like, hey, if there's something cool about your product, put it on TikTok. I'll see it there. But what they talked about most was kind of reinforcing what we're talking about. It's even more about the experience for them. Because yes, it's about the experience, but like their money is about the experience of what they can do with it.
Right.
Not even necessarily the experience with your company,
Right.
but it's more, they're translating your business into what they do in their personal life because of your business. It's really an interesting change in dynamic. So we're gonna get ready for questions here in just a second. I've got one more, but so we just talked about, positive experience leads to what in your mind? Because obviously there's got to be a reason to create the positive experiences.
I think it just leads to ongoing engagement. It leads to brand affiliation. It leads to just, once again, awareness, consideration, right? If you have a positive experience, and it doesn't necessarily need to be, I bought something from you. You've got to pull away from the push the product. And I would sort of, in my former life, I was training, and I would use this phrase all the time. And that is, you lead with need. You do not lead with product. And you need to feel confident that you're not pushing product, whether it is digitally, whether it's in person, you're actually helping somebody solve a need. And so you need to lead with that need, and if yours doesn't solve it, you have to have the confidence to walk away. That's a trusted relationship, like full stop. That's it. It's a virtuous cycle.
Yeah, I don't have much more to add. I would say, like, again, this concept of wanting to work with an organization, I don't think can be understood. Like, if I create a brand or I create an experience where my customers enjoy getting to work with us, and whether that's they enjoy the implementation process, they enjoy the sales process, or whatever that was, or every single time there's a problem, something goes bump in the night, when I reach out to a support team, that support team just goes above and beyond. Whatever that experience is, I'm more drawn in to do business with them in future as well. So again, they'll be my first call, and maybe they're not. I mean, think about it from your perspectives, right? Like, there are some companies or interactions that you've had with different companies that make you want to go back to them to see, can they solve this problem or not before I even go shopping elsewhere? And if nothing else, it's just a positive conversation and great interaction, and they might be able to point me in the right direction to be able to go and solve my problem. So I actually think that there's nothing negative about being able to create that positive experience. I think that it pays dividends in spades, whether immediately or further down the line.
All right, questions for Sue or in the very back.
Thank you. Hi. So you talked about creating all these experiences, positive, negative, in today's digital world. All of that information from the customer feedback comes to us as data. How do you see the person behind the data? How do you still keep it human when you're looking through all these numbers and skimming through data?
Yeah, it's hard, right? And so if I take a step back and I think about financial services, so I'll just give a bit of context. In my former life, I built up a team. We were the customer growth team at Scotiabank. And so it was net new. And what we did was we pulled all the sales targets and retention targets out of the product lines, novel, and put them in a centralized component. And so my team's accountability was to drive acquisition, utilization, engagement, retention across all 3 channels, right? They're like the omnichannel, the phone, the branch, and to coordinate that. And so going back, that if I had 1 moment of the customer's time, I had 1 moment of the advisor's time, if it was an advice-based, or I had 1 marketing dollar, where was I putting it to get the biggest bang for buck? That 100% required me to harness the power of big data, like harness it. And it is hard because I just finished talking about the product suite, let's just say on the retail side of the bank, you got all your GICs, you go all the way from money in to money out products, you've got cards, you've got, well, God, how do you determine what's next? How do you figure out how you present the offer from a customer offer library that's customized, that resonates? The personas are bloody endless, right? So it is hyper complex, but you have to start somewhere, would be my kind of advice. Don't start with 200, that depending on where you are, age and stage, don't start with 200,000 personas. Just start small and then build from there. Get sort of 5 or 6 personas, do a couple of next logical products, do some customization around that, do the proof of concept, and then kind of build out. Because if you try to solve world hunger, like, it's not gonna happen. But if you start proving value and how you're driving increased, whatever the metrics are, right? And I'd look at it as acquisition, utilization, and then engagement. So value add interactions, as I finished talking about, across the start small, and then you build, and then you build. It's not easy.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing I would add to that, she mentioned this concept of lead with the need and understanding what the actual customer problems are. I think if I understand what the customer problems are, and then I'm going to start thinking about like the customer journey to try to solve that problem, I think it also defines what data points I'm going to start looking for, because like there's so much data out there, and figuring out what's actually relevant is sometimes very, very difficult to do, and I just try grasping at straws. So if I'm trying to identify what the need is and then figuring out what that customer journey is and certain KPIs that address that problem or that pain or that need, it makes it a little easier. And again, I don't want to like take away from what she's saying. It's actually very, very difficult work to do, but it helps me trying to figure out what moments of truth there are. The other thing is, I think sometimes we shy away from bringing the customer along the journey to be able to figure out, like, am I actually solving your problem? Am I not? What would solve your problem? I think, like, I'm a big, big fan of just bringing the customer along.
Yeah, so the quant and the qual is critical, right?
Another question, right up front. He's right behind you. Sneaking up.
Hi, it's Amanda from CIBC. So I really like this idea of leading with need, but when you have organizations that have the product with the P&L, now how do you do it? Can you do
100%
that?
you can.
And then how do you do it?
Yeah. So as I said, sometimes you start small, right? So here at CIBC, how long have they been trying to crack the new client onboarding journey? Right? Like every bank's been trying to do that. That is the one that I would sit there and say is the best one to start with. So you do need, let me back up. You need support from top of house. So I reported into the EVP of retail product. And so we established this vision together. We were very clear on what it was going to take, what the KPIs were, how we were going to approach it. But you can't do it alone. You need to be empowered to do that. To cross product lines and to get people to go, okay, I buy in, you need somebody, it's a tone from the top. If you're trying to do that, you're trying to do that, off to the side. So if you're the data and analytics team and you're trying to drive and demonstrate value, that's a tough slog. You really need to actually go up on high, demonstrate the value, right? The ROI, ask for a proof of concept or a pilot, and then kind of build from there. So a rolling stone catches no moss kind of thing. You got to kind of prove it, and then they'll give you more and more and more rope to kind of build it out.
Okay. Awesome. Well, help me thank Karim and Sue. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, so we're going to move into lunch next, followed by the exhibit hall. But before, a couple announcements. So one, I think many of you even got old school paper surveys. We want feedback. I've already had people tell me, hey, we should do this a little bit differently, or I wish you would do that. I'll pass that on, but it's better from you. Put it in the surveys, plus $250 gift card for a drawing. All right, so we're going into lunch. I think lunch is in the other room. bring your food back in here. I will say one piece of feedback I got was that I put you too much on the spot this morning, that I started out by asking for feedback. I sometimes forget not everybody's a professional speaker. I'm surrounded by them every day. At National Speakers Association, we actually have a t-shirt that says, your worst fear is my day job. Because 70% of people don't like to do public speaking. So anyway, keep giving that feedback. Share it with us. Share it with the team. Happy to do that. But lunch right now, and then we'll be back after lunch. So thank you very much.